moment I saw that VHS tape, I felt it. A shiver ran down my spine, not from the cold, but from something else, something that I couldn't quite put my finger on. The room around me was cramped and dim, rows of old, forgotten tapes stacked high on every shelf, each one sealed with time and dust. The faint smell of mildew hung in the air, a reminder of how little this place had changed over the years. Think you know how this story ends? Share your thoughts in the comments and don't forget to subscribe for more chilling tales. It wasn't the kind of place most people would visit anymore. Everyone had moved on to streaming, digital downloads, all the shiny new tech. But not here. This was a place for those who craved the past, the nostalgic souls searching for a piece of history, a piece of a simpler time. I wasn't much different, honestly. I loved the old tapes too, the way they looked, the way they felt in your hands, the way you had to rewind them just to play them again. Something about that made them special. I wasn't looking for anything in particular when I walked in that day. Just another rental to keep the business afloat. Money was tight, and renting out these tapes was about all I had left. But that tape, it didn't look like the others. It was hidden behind a pile of much older, more worn-down tapes, the label faded and almost illegible. Something about it drew me in, like it was waiting for me. I pulled it out, my fingers tracing the old plastic casing. There was no name on the tape, just a single handwritten word. Never. That was odd. Most tapes had some sort of title, but this one had nothing. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had to know more. I remember glancing around the store, half expecting someone to come in and stop me. But it was quiet. Too quiet. The bell on the door hadn't rung in hours. It was just me, the tape, and the creeping feeling that I was doing something I shouldn't. I'd been in this business long enough to know what people liked. The horror movies, the thrillers, the mystery tapes. Those were the ones people wanted. But this tape, no one had ever rented it. Not once. In fact, I'd always been warned about it. Don't rent it out, people had told me. It's cursed. They said that about a lot of tapes, though. I figured it was just superstition. But as I stood there, holding it in my hands, I couldn't help but feel different. Something about it didn't seem right. The rest of the store faded away as I stared at that one tape. I almost put it back, I almost did. But there was something pulling me in. Something I couldn't resist. The rules had always been simple at the shop. Rent the tapes, return them, and don't ask too many questions. But this felt different. Like it was a rule I couldn't break. Like it was a rule I was meant to break. I walked to the counter, tape in hand. There were no other customers today, just the quiet hum of the fluorescent lights above me and the creeping feeling that something, or someone, was watching. I put the tape on the counter, unsure of what I was doing, but feeling as though I had no other choice. There was a whisper in my ear, barely audible, but unmistakable. Don't watch it. It was the kind of warning you can't ignore. But I did. And soon enough, I would wish I hadn't. I didn't watch the tape right away. Something about it made me hesitant, like the very act of playing it would set something in motion that couldn't be undone. So, I set it aside, trying to convince myself it was just another old video. But I couldn't shake the unease. That single word on the label, never, kept echoing in my mind. It wasn't until I went to lock up the shop that things got strange. I reached under the counter for the spare keys and found something I hadn't noticed before. A folded piece of paper, yellowed with age. It was crammed into the back of the drawer, like someone had deliberately tried to hide it. Curiosity got the better of me. I unfolded the paper, and what I saw made my chest tighten. It wasn't just a note, it was a list. Rules for the tape. Do not watch it alone. Do not stop the tape before it finishes. If you hear whispering, do not respond. If the tape starts playing by itself, leave the room immediately. I laughed nervously, shaking my head. It had to be a prank. Some kind of twisted joke left behind by a bored customer. Still, there was something unnerving about the handwriting. Slanted, jagged, almost frantic, as though whoever wrote it had done so in a hurry. I read the rules again, this time more slowly. They didn't feel like a joke anymore. They felt specific, too specific. As I stood there holding the note, a soft thud came from somewhere in the back of the store. My stomach dropped. The place was supposed to be empty. I put the note down, telling myself it was probably just a box falling over, maybe a rat knocking something loose. I walked toward the sound, trying to steady my breathing. The rows of tapes seemed longer than usual, the shadows between them darker. I reached the back shelf, scanning for anything out of place. That's when I saw it. The tape I'd left on the counter was now sitting neatly on the shelf, right in front of me. I froze. There was no way I'd put it there. I'd left it at the counter. I was sure of it. My mind scrambled for an explanation. Maybe I'd just forgotten. Maybe I was tired, and my brain was playing tricks on me. I grabbed the tape, determined to put it back where it belonged. But as soon as I touched it, a low hum filled the room. It wasn't coming from the speakers or the lights. It was deeper, like the sound was seeping out of the walls. I dropped the tape and stumbled back, nearly knocking over a stack of tapes behind me. The hum stopped as suddenly as it had started, leaving the store deathly quiet. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I looked down at the tape lying on the floor. That's when I saw the note again, its words now burned into my memory. Don't watch it alone. Don't stop the tape. Don't respond. Don't. I couldn't leave the shop fast enough. I locked up, double-checked the door, and practically ran to my car. The tape was still inside, lying there on the passenger seat, almost daring me to throw it out the window. But I couldn't. The rules rattled around in my head all the way home. They didn't make sense, but they didn't feel like something I could ignore. And that was the worst part. I didn't even know what would happen if I broke them. But something deep inside me told me I didn't want to find out. When I got home, I placed the tape on the coffee table and stared at it. Hours passed and still I didn't touch it. I told myself I was just being cautious, that I'd watch it tomorrow, maybe invite a friend over, just in case. But as the night stretched on, the rules felt less like a precaution and more like a warning. And then it happened. A faint whisper, so soft I almost thought I'd imagined it. It came from the direction of the coffee table. My breath caught. I leaned forward, straining to hear it. The whisper came again, clearer this time. Press play. I shot up from the couch, backing away from the tape as if it were alive. The room felt colder, the shadows stretching longer than they should have. The rules flashed in my mind like a neon sign. Don't respond. I didn't. I grabbed my keys, my coat, anything I could think of to put distance between me and that thing. But as I reached for the door, I froze. The TV had turned itself on. The screen was static, crackling softly in the silence. And there, sitting in the VCR slot, was the tape. The one I'd left on the coffee table. It had already started playing. I couldn't move. The TV glowed with static, humming softly in the dark. The tape was inside the VCR, turning on its own. I hadn't touched it. I hadn't even gone near it since the whisper. But now it was playing. I took a shaky step back, my mind racing. The rules, it was the rules. They weren't a joke. They weren't a prank. They were real. And I was breaking them just by standing there alone, watching. Don't watch it alone. The words flashed in my head like a warning siren. My breathing was shallow, my pulse pounding in my ears. The room felt too quiet, like the air itself was holding its breath. I reached for the remote, desperate to turn it off, but my hand stopped halfway. The screen shifted. The static faded, replaced by a grainy black and white image of an empty room. A living room, from the looks of it, plain, with an old couch and a single lamp. And then the lamp flickered. I froze, my hands still outstretched. The room on the screen looked so familiar. My stomach twisted as I realized why. It wasn't just any room. It was my living room. The lamp in the corner of the screen flickered again. The same lamp I could see now, just a few feet away. I stared at the TV, then back at the lamp, then back again, my mind struggling to make sense of what I was seeing. And then something moved. It was quick, just a shadow passing across the screen. But it was enough to send a jolt of cold fear through my body. I spun around, expecting to see someone or something behind me, but the room was empty. I turned back to the TV, my hands trembling. The shadow was gone, but the screen now showed something else, me. I was standing right there, frozen in place, watching myself on the screen. The image was grainy, but there was no mistaking it. Same clothes, same posture, same terrified expression. "Leave the room," a voice whispered. I didn't know where it came from, but it wasn't a suggestion. It was a command. I stumbled backward, tripping over the coffee table as I scrambled to get away from the screen. My heart was racing, my thoughts a blur of panic. The rules, I had to remember the rules. If the tape starts playing by itself, leave the room immediately. My chest tightened. That's what it was doing. The tape had started by itself, and now it was pulling me into whatever nightmare it was hiding. I didn't think twice. I grabbed the doorknob and yanked it open, running into the hallway as fast as my legs would carry me. The cool air hit me like a slap, and for a moment, I thought I was safe. But then I heard it. Footsteps. They were soft at first, like someone walking barefoot, but they were getting louder, closer. I spun around, but the hallway was empty. Still, the sound was unmistakable, echoing down the walls like they were mocking me. I pressed my back against the wall, my breath coming in short gasps. The footsteps stopped, and for a moment, there was silence. And then the lights flickered. The hallway plunged into darkness for a split second before the light buzzed back on. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. I told myself it's just my imagination. I whispered, trying to steady my breathing. It's not real. It's not real. But the feeling of being watched wouldn't go away. I forced myself to move, to get as far away from the room as I could. My hands were shaking as I reached for my phone, dialing the first number I could think of. But the call didn't go through. Instead, the line filled with static, and then the same whisper came through the receiver. "Why did you leave?" I dropped the phone, my knees buckling. My mind was screaming at me to run, but my legs felt like lead. The whisper came again, this time from behind me. I turned slowly, my pulse thundering in my ears. The hallway was empty, or at least it looked empty, but the air felt heavy, like I wasn't alone. The lamp in the living room flickered again, casting strange shadows against the walls. And then I heard it, the VCR starting to rewind itself. The soft whir of the tape being pulled back to the beginning. I stared down the hallway, my feet frozen in place. I couldn't go back in there. I wouldn't go back in there. But the whisper was louder now, closer. "You have to finish it." I couldn't finish it. Whatever it was, I didn't care. That whisper, so close, too close, was enough to send me running down the hall and into the nearest room. My hands were trembling as I slammed the door shut behind me. The whispering stopped, but the air felt wrong, heavy, like the room was holding its breath. I leaned against the door, trying to gather myself. My heart felt like it might burst out of my chest. And then I heard it again. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, and coming closer. I froze. The door felt too thin, too fragile. It wouldn't protect me. My mind was racing. What if it got in? What if it was already here? My eyes darted around the room. It was small, barely more than a storage closet. Boxes were stacked high against the walls, old papers and forgotten junk piled everywhere. But there was no place to hide, no escape. The footsteps stopped, right outside the door. I held my breath, every muscle in my body screaming to stay silent. My hand tightened around the doorknob, like I could somehow hold it shut if it tried to open. For a moment, there was nothing, just silence. And then the doorknob moved. A slow, deliberate twist like someone was testing it. I bit down hard on my lip, stifling a gasp. My knees felt weak. My body pressed so tightly against the door that I could feel every slight vibration. The knob stopped moving, and I dared to hope, just for a second, that it would leave. But then came the knock. Soft at first, almost polite, and then louder. Bang, bang, bang. The door rattled against the frame, the sound echoing in the tiny room. I couldn't hold back the scream that escaped my throat. Open the door, a voice whispered. It wasn't human. Couldn't be. My mind flashed to the rules, the ones I hadn't meant to break. The ones I hadn't even fully understood. Don't watch it alone. Don't stop the tape. I'd already failed. The banging stopped as abruptly as it had started. The silence that followed was worse, stretching out like a weight pressing down on my chest. And then I heard it, a faint scratching like nails dragging across wood. It was slow, deliberate, and it was coming from inside the room. I turned my head. My breath caught in my throat. The boxes along the wall shifted, ever so slightly. No, this wasn't real. Couldn't be real. The scratching grew louder, more frantic. And then, from behind the stack of boxes, something moved. I stumbled back, my hands scrambling for the doorknob. Whatever was behind those boxes, I didn't want to see it. The room felt smaller now, the air thicker. The walls seemed to close in, shadows stretching longer than they should have. And then I saw it. Just a glimpse, a flash of something pale, something wrong. A face, twisted and unrecognizable, peering at me from between the boxes. Its eyes weren't eyes. They were empty, endless voids that seemed to pull me in, swallowing the room around me. My legs finally obeyed. I yanked the door open and bolted into the hallway, the cool air hitting me like a slap. I didn't stop running. Couldn't. But no matter how far I ran, the whisper followed. You have to finish it. I kept running, my breath coming in sharp, ragged gasps. The hallway seemed endless, the shadows stretching and twisting with every flicker of the lights. The whisper was still there, faint but persistent, like it was just behind me. You can't run forever. I stumbled into the living room, slamming the door shut behind me. My eyes darted around the room, desperate for anything that might keep me safe. But there was nothing, just the same dim light, the same flickering lamp, and the TV. The tape was still playing. The screen showed the hallway I had just come from. My own blurred image was there, frozen mid-run, as though the tape had recorded every panicked step. I felt a wave of nausea rise in my throat. How was this happening? The image on the screen shifted. The camera moved, slowly, deliberately, down the hallway, inching closer to the door I had just shut. My stomach churned as the camera stopped, focusing on the door. The door rattled. I stumbled backward, shaking my head. This wasn't real. Couldn't be real. Finish it, the whisper came again, louder this time. My eyes snapped to the tape. It was spinning faster now, the hum of the VCR filling the room. I could feel the pull, the way it seemed to demand my attention. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to get as far away from it as I could. But the rules wouldn't leave my mind. If the tape starts playing by itself, leave the room immediately. But I couldn't. It was too late for that. My knees buckled, and I collapsed onto the floor, my back against the wall. The TV screen flickered again. The image shifted, this time to the living room. To me. I was there, slumped against the wall, staring at the screen just as I was now. But something was wrong. In the image, I wasn't alone. Behind me, just barely visible in the corner of the screen, was a shadow. A figure, standing impossibly still, its face obscured by the darkness. I whipped around, my heart hammering in my chest. The room was empty, but when I turned back to the screen, the figure had moved closer. It was behind me. I scrambled to my feet, knocking over the coffee table in the process. The tape was relentless, spinning faster, the hum now a roar in my ears. "Finish it," the whisper boomed, no longer soft but commanding, filling the room like a scream. I had no choice. I had to end this. My hands trembled as I reached for the VCR. I fumbled with the buttons, desperate to eject the tape, to make it stop. But the machine didn't respond. The room grew colder, the air thick with something I couldn't name. The lights flickered one last time before going out completely, plunging the room into darkness. And then I felt it, a hand on my shoulder. I froze, every muscle in my body locking in place. The whisper came again, softer now, almost gentle. "Don't stop the tape," but I couldn't listen. My fingers found the power cord, and I yanked it from the wall. The hum of the VCR died instantly, the screen going black. For a moment there was silence, and then chaos. The tape ejected itself violently, flying out of the VCR and clattering onto the floor. The shadows in the room seemed to come alive, twisting and writhing as though they had been set free. And then I saw it, the figure from the screen. It was no longer just a shadow. It was here in the room with me. Its face was blank, featureless, but its presence was suffocating. It didn't move. It didn't have to. The air around it seemed to pulse, drawing me in. "You broke the rules," the whisper said, no longer outside my head but inside it, crawling through my thoughts like a living thing. I stumbled back, tripping over the coffee table again. My vision blurred, my mind screaming at me to do something, anything, to make it stop. The tape was still on the floor, lying there like a trap. Without thinking, I grabbed it. The figure didn't move, but the air grew colder, heavier. I shoved the tape back into the VCR, my hands shaking so badly it took 2 tries. The machine whirred to life, the screen flickering back on. The shadows stopped. The figure didn't disappear, but it didn't move closer either. It just stood there, watching as the tape began to play. The screen showed the living room again. Me sitting frozen on the floor, staring at the TV. But the figure wasn't behind me anymore. It was sitting beside me. Couldn't take it. My body finally obeyed and I ran. I didn't care where. I didn't care how far. I just needed to get out. The door slammed shut behind me, and I kept running until my legs gave out. The whisper didn't follow this time, but the feeling of being watched, that never left. I don't remember much about what happened after I ran. My legs carried me as far as they could, my mind clouded by panic and the overwhelming need to escape. The world outside felt distant, unreal. The night air was cold against my skin, but it wasn't enough to shake the feeling that something was still with me. When I finally stopped, my chest heaving and my limbs trembling, I realized I had no idea where I was. The streets were empty, the only sound my ragged breathing and the faint hum of a flickering street lamp. I turned in circles, scanning the shadows for any sign of movement, but the street was silent. And yet I wasn't alone. I could feel it, something lingering just out of sight, watching, always watching. I wanted to believe it was over. I wanted to convince myself that running had worked, that whatever force had been unleashed by the tape had stayed behind. But deep down, I knew the truth. The whisper hadn't followed me. It was inside me now. For days, I stayed locked in my apartment, too afraid to leave, too afraid to sleep. The TV remained unplugged, the tape discarded somewhere on the road during my desperate escape. But no matter how far I tried to push it from my mind, it wouldn't let me go. The shadows in my apartment seemed darker, shifting in ways they shouldn't. At night, I swore I could hear faint whispers, so soft they were almost imperceptible. I tried to ignore them, but they only grew louder, more persistent. "Finish it," they said. "You can't escape." I didn't dare tell anyone what had happened. Who would believe me? Sounded insane even to me. A cursed tape, rules that had to be followed, a figure that wasn't human but somehow very real. And yet, every time I closed my eyes, I saw it. The blank face, the empty eyes. I thought about leaving, running somewhere far away, but I knew it wouldn't matter. Whatever this was, it wasn't bound by distance. The rules still echoed in my mind, mocking me with their simplicity. Don't watch it alone. Don't stop the tape. And yet, even as I tried to move on, to pretend it was all some horrible dream, part of me couldn't let go. Part of me needed to understand what had happened, what I had unleashed. One night, weeks after it all began, I woke to find the tape on my coffee table. My breath caught in my throat. It wasn't possible. I'd left it behind, thrown it away. But there it was, sitting there like it had never left. The VCR, which I hadn't touched since that night, was plugged in. The screen was on, glowing faintly with static. I didn't move, couldn't. The whispers returned, louder now, filling the room with their impossible weight. "You know what you have to do." I don't know why, but I reached for the tape. My fingers closed around the familiar plastic, and I felt a strange calm wash over me, like the fight was already over. Maybe it always had been. As I placed the tape back into the VCR, the static on the screen shifted. For the first time, I saw my reflection staring back at me. And then I wasn't alone. Ready for more chills and mysteries? Subscribe and turn on the bell. You never know what story is coming next.